Every few years, the internet goes crazy over the same question. Who is the richest person alive? And for the last decade, the answer has always been the same kind of person. Tech founder, an American, someone you've seen on the cover of a magazine. Someone whose company you probably used this morning. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates. These names feel like the ceiling of what human wealth can look like. But here's the thing, every single one of those comparisons is incomplete. Not slightly off, not a matter of interpretation. Incomplete in a way that changes everything. Because the richest human being who ever lived died in 1337. He was African. He ruled an empire most people today cannot even find on a map. And the amount of wealth he controlled makes every modern billionaire look like someone checking their couch cushions for spare change. His name was Mansa Musa. And by the time this video is over, you are going to understand why that name should be taught in every economics class, every history class, and every conversation about wealth, power, and who actually built the world we live in. Let's start with an honest admission. Economists who have tried to calculate Mansa Musa's wealth run into a wall that doesn't exist with modern billionaires. Elon Musk's net worth fluctuates with Tesla's stock price. You can look it up in real time. Mansa Musa didn't have a stock price. He controlled the production of the resource that the entire medieval world used as money. That's not a fortune, that's a different category of power entirely. The most commonly cited estimate lands around $400 billion in today's terms. But serious historians will tell you that number is probably an undercount because it tries to put a price tag on something that functioned more like owning the mint itself. With that context in mind, let's talk about what that actually looks like in the real world. Let's begin with Tesla. Tesla as a company. The cars, the factories, the gigafactories, the patents, the energy division is worth around $600 billion on a good day. It has taken decades to build. It required access to modern capital markets and the combined labor of over 100,000 employees worldwide. Mansa Musa could have bought Tesla. Not with a loan, not by selling assets. He could have purchased the entire company and still had tens of billions left over. And Tesla is one of the most valuable companies in the history of the United States stock market. That is where we are starting. That is the floor of this conversation. Now let's go bigger. Apple, the most valuable company on earth for much of the last 15 years. Worth somewhere between $2.5 and $3 trillion. iPhones, MacBooks, the App Store, the supply chain that stretches across continents. The brand that people line up outside in the rain to give money to. Mansa Musa's wealth does not match Apple's total valuation. We need to be honest about that. But here is what matters. Apple is a corporation. It has hundreds of millions of shareholders. It is the aggregated product of hundreds of thousands of workers and decades of accumulated intellectual property. Mansa Musa was one man, one individual human being, and his personal wealth was in the same conversation as the most valuable corporation in human history. Let that sit for a second. And if that's not enough, let's talk about gold, because Mansa Musa's wealth wasn't in dollars or in stock or in cryptocurrency. It was in gold, physical gold. The Mali Empire sat on top of the largest gold deposits in the known world. Mansa Musa didn't just own the gold, he controlled the mines, the trade routes, and the distribution. At its peak, the Mali Empire was producing somewhere between 40% and 50% of the world's entire gold supply, nearly half of everything. Every gold coin minted in Europe, every gold piece traded in the Middle East, a significant portion traced back to one man's territory. To put that in modern terms, imagine if one person controlled nearly half of the world's oil production. Not one country, one person. That's the closest modern equivalent to what Mansa Musa had. Except oil gets used up. Gold doesn't disappear, it accumulates. And for decades, it accumulated under his control. Think about the Federal Reserve. The United States Federal Reserve currently holds approximately 8,000 metric tons of gold in reserve, the single largest gold reserve held by any institution on Earth. Stored in vaults beneath New York City, protected by some of the most sophisticated security systems ever built. Mansa Musa's empire was producing enough gold annually that he could have added meaningfully to that reserve every single year. Not matched it in total, added to it annually from one empire's yearly output. Now I want to stop for a second because I know what's happening in your head right now. You're thinking, if this is real, why have I never heard of it? Hold that question, we're going to answer it. But first, I need you to understand the full picture because we haven't even talked about the land yet. Wealth in the 14th century wasn't just about what you had in your treasury, it was about what you controlled. Mansa Musa controlled an area of land roughly 1.3 million square kilometers in size. An empire that stretched across what are now Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Niger, and parts of Nigeria and Mauritania. This wasn't empty desert. This was productive land with cities, agricultural regions, and major trade routes. If you took the economic output of France, Germany, and Spain and placed it under the control of a single ruler, you would be getting close. And in the 14th century, the wealth of West Africa was not some secondary prize. It was the prize. It was the thing that made trade routes worth dying for. His military reflected that. Historical accounts describe a substantial standing army with a cavalry force of several thousand horses. In the 14th century, cavalry was the equivalent of air power. The most mobile, most devastating, most expensive military asset you could field. Maintaining thousands of war horses required animals, trainers, armor, riders, and full logistics infrastructure across hundreds of miles. You could not fake that capability. You either had the wealth to sustain it, or you didn't. Mansa Musa did. And now we get to the moment that everything in this video has been building toward. The single event that, more than any statistic, shows you what this level of wealth actually means when it moves through the world. In 1324, Mansa Musa decided to make the Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. He was a devout Muslim, and he went, but he didn't go quietly. He traveled with an enormous entourage, thousands of attendants, officials, soldiers, and merchants. Camels carrying hundreds of pounds of gold dust. Officials carrying golden staffs, servants dressed in fine fabrics. He distributed gold generously throughout every city he passed through, to the poor, to merchants, to local rulers as gifts of goodwill. When he passed through Cairo, the scale of his generosity created a problem nobody anticipated. He introduced so much gold into the Egyptian market over just a few months that he caused significant inflation in the gold trade. Contemporary historian al-Makrizi described the disruption to gold prices as lasting for roughly a decade. Merchants and traders who had nothing to do with his visit saw the value of their holdings decrease because the market had been flooded, not by a war, not by a financial crisis, by one man being generous on his way to Mecca. There is no clean modern equivalent to this. The closest analogy would be if a single individual flew into a country and started giving away the commodity its entire economy was priced in. The scale of what Mansa Musa did in Cairo was not financial aggression. It was sincere religious generosity. The economic disruption was a side effect. That's the part that's almost impossible to process. The damage was accidental. He also, on that same journey, commissioned architecture. In Timbuktu, already one of the great intellectual centers of the medieval world, home to universities that held hundreds of thousands of manuscripts and attracted scholars from across the Islamic world. Mansa Musa funded the construction of the Jingwareba Mosque. That mosque still stands today. People still pray in it. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site built in 1327. It has survived nearly 7 centuries of weather, political change, and the passage of time, and it is still in active use. That is what Mansa Musa considered a reasonable expenditure on his way home from a religious journey. If you found any of this surprising, take a second and hit that subscribe button, because this channel is built around exactly this kind of story, history that's real, documented, and somehow never made it into the classroom. There's a lot more where this came from. Now comes the question this whole video has been circling. If all of this is documented, confirmed by Arab historians, corroborated by European cartographers, studied by modern academics, then why don't you know this? Why wasn't Mansa Musa in your textbook? Why did your history class spend weeks on the Roman Empire and maybe one paragraph on all of medieval Africa? The answer requires us to think about who writes history and when. When European powers expanded into Africa during the 18th and 19th centuries, one of the tools used to justify that expansion was a particular story about Africa. That it had no significant pre-colonial history, no great empires, no architectural legacy worth preserving. This wasn't a conclusion historians reached after careful study. It was a framework that made certain political outcomes easier to defend. And once that framework was embedded in textbooks and curricula, it became self-reinforcing. Each generation learned the same omissions and passed them on. The Mali Empire got reduced to a footnote. Mansa Musa became a trivia answer rather than a lesson. And most people in the English-speaking world grew up with a mental model of wealth and civilization that is simply missing a major chapter. This matters beyond the history itself. The stories we accept about who was powerful, who built things that lasted, those stories influence what we believe is possible. Knowing that the wealthiest individual in recorded history was African doesn't fix those systems by itself. But it's a correction that belongs in the conversation, and now you have it. Leave a comment below with one word, just one, that describes what you're feeling right now. I read every single one. And if you know someone who thinks they have a solid handle on economic history, send them this video. Don't set it up, just send it. Mansa Musa died in 1337. The exact date is disputed. The exact cause is not recorded. What is not disputed is what he left behind: an empire, a legacy, a mosque that has stood for nearly 700 years, and a moment in Cairo that disrupted a regional economy through nothing more than generosity. He was not a myth. He was a documented historical figure, confirmed by multiple independent sources across multiple cultures and languages. His existence and his wealth are not seriously contested by any credible historian. He was real. He was the richest person who ever lived, and now you know his name.